feels normal. They don't feel like red flags. Becoming aware and understanding the reality of the situation, this is the key to understanding and healing from what you've gone through, healing from this abuse. Hello, truth tellers. Welcome back to the ADHD Scapegoat podcast, where we talk about everything ADHD and scapegoating. I'm Angie.
I'm Jeremy, and in today's episode, we share signs of family dysfunction and how to spot narcissistic abuse.
So let's talk about it. Right now, we're all getting back into our routines, back to our day-to-day, and we often reflect on the aftermath of the holiday season. And holiday gatherings can bring a lot of joy and fun and chaos, right? But in a dysfunctional family with narcissistic abuse, it's just chaos and confusion.
Like the Seven Fishes episode of The Bear.
If you haven't watched The Bear, you gotta. It's so good. But you're absolutely right. If you're reflecting on last year and want to implement growth into your life this year, as we discussed in our last episode about no resolutions, you may be seeking clarity around these experiences with your family and whether you're in abusive situations, examining behavior patterns and wanting to understand what's happening and just becoming more aware. We're going to bring some clarity to the chaos that exists in these dysfunctional family systems, as well as talking about the narcissistic abuse within those systems. So, the American Psychological Association describes a dysfunctional family as a family in which relationships or communication are impaired and members are unable to attain closeness and self-expression. A family is considered dysfunctional if they meet these criteria on a regular basis as a standard part of their life together. That tracks. And I think a lot of times the idea of a dysfunctional family, just by the name, and I think a lot of times any of these terms, they're villainized or just misunderstood. I mean, ADHD in itself is a terrible description of the actual disorder, but I think sometimes, especially in people who lack self-reflection and awareness and don't understand, they will immediately take a negative connotation to some of these terms that we're using instead of looking what they actually represent. And I think a lot of that has to deal with shame and denial and not wanting to look at the reality of situations. But there's an embarrassment that people feel about saying, I come from a dysfunctional family system, or, oh my gosh, my family's dysfunctional. And I don't necessarily think it even needs to be discussed in that way, but maybe just in your own awareness and learning, you can at least acknowledge that these dysfunctional family patterns are there, right? That's a jumping off point. And the other side of it is when we talk about narcissistic abuse. So in her YouTube video, Everything You Need to Know About the 7 Types of Narcissists, Dr. Ramani, I've brought her up before. She's a leading expert in narcissistic abuse. She talks about the difference between calling someone narcissistic versus someone being diagnosed with NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, and how it's often one of the criticisms placed on a person saying, I think my dad's narcissistic, and the response being, you have no right to diagnose them. She says, blah, 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 you have no right. People getting really defensive about it. She says, you're not diagnosing them. Although narcissism feels like a really clinical term, especially when she says it because she's a doctor and an expert in this. But even when anyone says it, it's really not. It's a description. It's no different than calling someone stubborn or introverted or agreeable. narcissism is a deeply misunderstood word, and it starts with that. People thinking it's a diagnosis and you can't diagnose someone else. Whereas, narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosis based on a list of criteria from the DSM-5, just like ADHD. And since narcissists are incapable of self-reflection, rarely do they get diagnosed. So it's hard to say, oh, they're not diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, so they're not narcissistic. They don't have narcissism, because they won't go to get the diagnosis. It's just like saying someone with ADHD doesn't have ADHD just because they haven't been diagnosed. There's a lot of people walking around with ADHD that haven't gotten a diagnosis, aren't getting support and treatment. It doesn't mean the ADHD doesn't exist, right? So when we use the word narcissism on this podcast, we're describing these people by the patterns of behavior that they display. This isn't just a one-off incident and, oh, they're narcissistic because they behaved in a narcissistic way once. No, this is a pervasive pattern of abuse that we now recognize. So when I truly woke up to the levels of toxicity in my family of origin, I needed to understand why. And we talked about this previously, just the need to know when you come from trauma, the need to understand, and a lot of having ADHD and feeling misunderstood, you have that want to understand always, because you want to be understood. So you want to understand other people. You want to understand what's going on. I think it's a combination of a trauma response and also just you responding to your environment as an ADHDer, right? But in my family situation, since no one would have a conversation with me, and let's be honest, I wouldn't trust them if they did, but needing to understand why they treated me this way and continue to treat me this way wasn't going to come from a conversation that I was always willing to have. So knowing that that conversation for understanding wasn't available, it didn't remove my need to understand or my willingness to understand or wanting it. So I had to do something with that. Does that track?
That tracks.
Okay. The reality of the situation was that it didn't matter to them. Like, they don't care that they've hurt me or even that I'm hurting. So I did what I've always done, and I figured it out on my own. And when I say I figured it out on my own, I did the work. I read the books. I go to therapy. I do coaching. I have hard conversations with safe people. I'm not doing it by myself. I'm not in that idea of, I'm saying I did it on my own because I sought the support that I needed.
You wanted to have a conversation with your parents individually. They're reluctant to do that and have the deeper conversations that would help you understand your treatment. And so you sought help elsewhere with your therapist, through education, through extensive reading, through probably your coursework in your ADHD coaching.
Yeah.
Right? All of that served as education, enlightenment to find this. That was your pathway to finding the answers to your upbringing, your mistreatment, and to present day. And so when you say it's a pattern of behavior, I'm seeing them now. I didn't see them necessarily at the beginning of our relationship because, again, I wasn't privy to all of your entire upbringing. But the more that I've learned and how I've seen you treated by your family of origin, it's very easy to recognize these narcissistic patterns.
Right. And I think that when I'm figuring it out on my own, if I didn't look up that book and read that book, I wouldn't understand. If I didn't ask these questions and bring them to therapy, I wouldn't understand. If I didn't do coaching with my coaching partner, I wouldn't understand if I didn't take my hard conversations with safe people like you and my older sister and my younger brother, I wouldn't be able to have hard conversations with others, right? Like, there's always levels at which I had to take that step on my own, but it doesn't mean it doesn't include other people that supported that, right?
That's you being a cycle breaker. That's you using your ADHD curiosity to dig a little bit deeper, but that's also you being willing to do the work. And we've talked about this before. You've asked your parents straight out, please go to therapy. Please seek help for these things that I can see you struggling with, that you've told me you're struggling with. And they just won't do it. They're not willing to do that same work that you just said. If I hadn't read the book, if I hadn't gone to therapy, if I hadn't talked to safe people, they can do those things too, and they're choosing not to.
And I think there's also an aspect for us ADHDers is because the world, society, schools is set up for a neurotypical person, the amount of work an ADHDer has to do to stay on that same level is so much more to just do the quote unquote normal thing. We're not afraid to put in the work when we know that it will be beneficial, that it interests us, that it's something we want. We're not afraid to put in the work. We're not afraid to have real conversations. We actually prefer hard conversations, real conversations, to actually connect to the person and understand them. So from some of that research, I want to share some information from 2 of the many books that I've read to hopefully bring some clarity to the chaos that you may be experiencing as well. So the first book is You're Not the Problem. And it's by Helen Villiers and Katie McKenna. They're from the Insight Podcast UK. Amazing women. I love listening to them. I can't even remember the first time I heard. They were on someone else's podcast that I happened to listen to. And now I don't remember. But I heard them on another podcast and I immediately was, I need to go listen to them. And I got this for myself for my birthday because it actually came out on my birthday. So I pre-ordered it. So I received it on my birthday. So this is talking about the impact of narcissism, and their insight is about narcissistic families and how people heal from this emotional abuse. And the part that I bookmarked to go over is ways to recognize, and there are characteristics of a narcissistic parent. So I'm just going to read through them and then we can discuss if we need. So here's the list. They're highly critical of you, your friends, your neighbors, everything, everyone, and anything. Nothing is ever good enough. Even if you did what they expected, they would find a reason why it wasn't enough. They're self-centered. Everything is about them. For example, how your mental health makes them feel bad. They're controlling. They want you to do what they want you to do and shame and disapprove of you for not complying. They're manipulative, coerce you into doing things you don't want to do, or use guilt trips to get your time or money. They're invasive. They feel entitled to know everything about you, your friends, romantic life, sexual development. They create drama, especially if there's an event at which they're not the center of attention. They manage to always bring the focus back to them. They're unpredictable. You don't know what mood they will be in or how they will react to a certain situation. They invade your privacy, read your diary, go through your things, including your phone, social media accounts, take your door off as punishment. They're entitled to time, money, information, grandchildren, emotional labor. They make every event, everything about them. Your wedding, your birthday, your grief, your divorce, your pain, any event where they are not the center of attention. They take ownership of your achievements. If you graduate, they got you there. They overshare personal, intimate information. For example, telling everyone you're pregnant before you're ready or that you're having problems in your relationship. They talk to you about emotional, financial, relationship worries of their own. They play the victim instead of accepting responsibility. For example, if you tell them you're unhappy that they shared your private information, they'll say, "How could you accuse me of being a gossip? I would never. I can't believe my own child would say such a thing." They treat you as if you are below them, telling you they know better than you and know you better than you know yourself. They're uninterested in your life unless there's a gain for them. If you get a promotion, they'll ask how much you're being paid to see if they can benefit from it. They get angry with you when you are upset. They ignore your point of view. They shut down your opinion, especially if you disagree with them. They deny events happened that made them look bad. Ding, ding, ding. They use guilt to make you do things for them. They withdraw affection as a form of punishment. They blame you when you have an argument. Shame you for making a mistake. Refuse to accept responsibility for mistakes or hurtful behavior. Tell you you're overdramatic, overreacting, remembering things wrong. Bring up your past mistakes to avoid taking responsibility for their own. Act totally different in public from how they are in private. They control you with a look. Want to know everything about you and your personal life. Get annoyed when they're the last one to know something. They worry about what everyone else will think or say. They act like they're the victim in conflict situations. They make assumptions about other people's thought processes and intentions. They refuse to hear the word no. They must have the final word. No room for negotiation. They don't allow you to be angry. They base your worth on your achievements. They're too fixated on money to enjoy their children. They use gifts or acts of service to sweep things under the carpet. They don't accept boundaries. They offer apologies that are insincere in the way that they justify their behavior. They refuse to treat you like an adult. They stay in loveless relationships for the children. Brag about you to friends and family, but never compliment you directly. So they say, when a client describes a relationship with their parents involving these behaviors, whether some or all of them, we can see that the problems they face now have arisen from that relationship, stemming from beliefs that they were taught by an emotionally abusive or narcissistic parent. So I love that list because it's not necessarily the exhaustive list, but it's a very, very good list full of things that I don't think people necessarily see clearly in the moment. I think some of the things can be glossed over as, I've always hated the, oh, that's just how they are type of excuse. And I'm like, oh, so they're just an asshole all the time and we're cool with that? Oh, that's just how they are?
Like telling people that you're pregnant before you're ready to tell, that's making it about them so that they get the congratulations of, I'm going to be a grandmother, I'm going to be a grandfather. That's your news to tell. They're making it their news. Or, I mean, I made a quick list of, as you were going through them, because I think you've read these to me before, but I made a quick list of real life experiences from our relationship in which one or both of your parents exemplified this exact behavior. For example, our wedding was a little bit of a whirlwind because it happened. We got engaged right before your dad left your mom. And so...
Like 2 months or something.
Right. So they were going through their divorce through our engagement and our wedding. Yeah, wedding planning and wedding. And your dad was late to the rehearsal, I think, which he was bringing pieces. We built all of these things for our wedding because we had a country farm wedding, and we had all of these pieces, and like, so he would be late. And I think it was a little bit to prove a point because at that time we didn't invite his girlfriend because he's still married to your mom. We didn't invite his girlfriend to the wedding, and he was pretty sour about that. And so he would show up late to things and we'd have to kind of wait around. And so he's making that about him. You know, they'll have to wait. They can't do the wedding without me. Your mom was house hunting, like literally going to see houses the day of our wedding. Instead of being with you and helping you get ready, she had to be late because she had to go look at houses that day. And then, of course, your dad gave the ultimatum like the day after our wedding that he will no longer attend any events without his girlfriend. That's like a non-starter for him.
Well, and the understanding of the reason why she wasn't invited is because I was trying to have conversations with him to understand, because right when that fracture happened and all the, I guess, his values that he spoke to us about but did not do,
never displayed,
was to tell the truth, to not lie, to I mean, really, that was a huge thing, but he was doing all of that and we were calling him out. So I didn't even want him to walk me down the aisle as we're planning our wedding. It was like, we planned it in like 10 months. And so really we had only about like 2 months under our belt of planning, and I didn't even want him to walk me down the aisle because he didn't even respect his marriage enough to not cheat on his wife, and he ran out on her, and he didn't feel like someone I could trust with that. So I required, in order for him to do that, to sit down and have conversations with me and put in the work for us to understand each other and get to a place where I felt like we could do that. And he did. He showed up, and I thought, again, we're making progress. I'm going to see some change. Something is going to happen. And I remember him showing up late for things. And then I kept asking him, because I didn't want to do a father-daughter, like a traditional father-daughter dance, because I never felt close to him. I was always the scapegoat. So I never felt close to him. And those dances, I always looked at him at other people's weddings like, oh, she really loves her daddy, or, however, like, oh, this close relationship. And almost kind of that will never happen at my wedding. And knowing, okay, this is like tradition. But then when we got married, it was in the time of where people would do the dance. The dance surprise. So I brought that idea to him. Okay, let's start to this slow song and then let's rip into Footloose and start doing it. And so I wanted to rehearse with him what we were going to do. I showed him the part of the movie, which we've seen a million times, and wanted to rehearse with him. And he never wanted to. And I was getting really anxious. I'm like, I don't know if he's practicing it. I don't know if this is going to pull. Like, I just want to run through it and make sure we know what we're doing. And he just wouldn't do it. And so he was like, I'll get it on the day. Like, leave me alone. Like, I was being a bother by saying, can we run through this so I could feel comfortable doing this? This is like, I've never gotten married before. I've never done this. Like, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of moving parts when you're planning a wedding. And we were doing it all on our own. That it was like, could you just reassure me that we have this down? Because then I can put that part of the stress away. And he refused to do it. And then it was like, when the time came, he did pull it off. He had practiced it. He did know. So it was a manipulation tactic. Like, he was a hero for doing it, because the whole time up until the dance happened, I was terrified he was going to fuck it up, because he never gave me any confidence that he did it. And it's not that I didn't think that he would necessarily. I had so much on my plate. I just needed to run through it. And it felt very manipulative. And then, like you said, the day after, literally the morning after, when we're going to go back to his parents' house and clean up a little, because we were leaving on our honeymoon like the next day, I think it was.
Yeah, it was 2 days after.
Yeah. So we were just like picking up, because we had the wedding at your parents' house, and there's a text, a group family text saying that from this point on, if she's not invited to anything, I'm not coming. And so I felt like, oh my God, all of that work we did in those months leading up to the wedding, for him to be allowed to walk me down the aisle, to feel like we were actually getting a connection, it was just gone.
But that was all done. He was doing the little bits that he needed to do to keep up appearances, so that he didn't look like a jerk when you did get married in front of all of this other family, his side and your mom's side. Mm-hmm. Why isn't your dad walking? Why isn't her dad walking her down the aisle? He didn't want to be discussed in that sense. So,
but in that time, I didn't believe that. I believed he wanted to be there. He wanted this connection just as much as I did. So to have that ripped away, literally the morning after the wedding, to be like, it felt just like a big fuck you, really.
Yeah, and this is 12 years ago. So you didn't do all this education. You have such a good understanding of all of this now. It makes total sense. There's zero surprise right now, but 12 years ago,
it was confusing and hurtful.
Felt like someone pulled the rug out from under you.
Right. So, do you have other ones that you wrote down?
None that we need to discuss right now.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I mean, seeing if there's items that stand out, like I said, ding, ding, ding on the one. I mean, seriously, these characteristics and turning everything around on you And, there's a reason that I always sought this connection, because I wanted a connection and I believed in it. And to actually step back and understand these behaviors and these traits for what they really are, there's a grief in that. There's a sadness. And there's also a validation in my inner knowing that removes that confusion, feeling like the rug is being taken out from under us. So another part that I wanted to share to kind of help with more clarity is this book by Dr. Sherrie Campbell, Adult Survivors of Toxic Family Members. And she does a podcast as well. A lot of this is tools to maintain boundaries. She walks through different exercises to deal with criticism and heal from shame after ties have been cut. So she talks about no contact. We'll do an episode of that in a couple episodes about cutting ties with these toxic family members and the weight of the decision and all of that. But she does a great job of, because she's not only a doctor and an expert in it, but she's experienced it herself. So she's just like me, walking the walk and educating people on it. And actually, her descriptions a lot of the time, which also the women from the Insight podcast do in their book because they've both experienced it. But I think that's where we're at now in 2025, where we're not just experts because we learned about it in books. We've lived it. We understand it. And that's a lot of when I'm coaching and when I'm sharing my expertise, I'm an expert on my life. My clients are an expert on their lives. And so we work through, you know better than I do what you've been going through. And we just work together to find those solutions. And that's kind of when I'm reading these resources, I'm looking at us like that. Like there's, not everything in that list is necessarily, I didn't check every single box for every single characteristic, because there were certain things that they didn't do. But a majority of those were done. Those behaviors and those character traits were displayed. But one of the things that Dr. Sherrie works through is opening your eyes to what this toxic family system has ingrained in you versus what a healthy family system is. And I think that's something that if you've gone through any therapy or healing, they talk about, they'll ask, if you've been through, childhood trauma or complex PTSD, they'll say, what was your life like before the trauma? But if you were raised in the trauma, there wasn't no before and after trauma. There's just trauma and then unlearning that trauma and moving yourself in a healthy direction. And I think a lot of times when this becomes evident is when people are in that next stage of life where they're marrying into other families. Like sometimes you can marry into a family that's more toxic than yours, like you did. Or you marry into a family that's really healthy. And that, because you come from trauma, a healthier connection is uncomfortable. It feels wrong because it's not what you've experienced. And I think us bringing light and bringing clarity and sharing these characteristics and these traits and these behaviors is to help you see things that might feel normal because that's all you know and that's all you've seen. And I think when there's breaks in families, they can blame, the spouse or different things. And when I say that, when there's abuse happening, again, as I've said before, full stop, abuse is way different than when you're talking about blaming a spouse for changing a person. When there's abuse present, that is something that, whether it's domestic violence or isolation, all the tactics that abusers use. But when your toxic family or the abusers are saying, oh, that person changed you because they've opened you up to what is healthy, or they've been shining a light on it's not okay for them to talk to you like that. Like, the first time you said that was when my brother was screaming at me on the phone. And you looked at me and said, it's not okay that he keeps screaming at you like that. And I was like, you're right. And that's when I hung up. But it was like, you didn't do that. You're not the problem for saying you don't deserve to be treated like that. You actually just said the things out loud that I knew internally, but because I was so stuck in that was all I knew. That was how my brother always treated me. That's just what we do. Even though I didn't like it. It had to be pointed out. So a lot of times seeing these things or noticing them as red flags isn't as cut and dry as some may think. Like, when you come from a healthy family, you're like, obviously that's wrong, obviously. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it is wrong, after I've learned and had some time in a healthy dynamic, right? So she gives this amazing list of labels from a toxic family system. And then if you look at a healthy family system, how they actually label that same person. And as an ADHDer, being labeled incorrectly, misunderstood, Dr. Ned Hollowell, an expert that I talk about, I just love him. He always flips these negative phrases about ADHD on their head and share, maybe in that moment it feels like this, but it actually represents this. So we're gonna go through some of these. So labels from a toxic family system: bossy. The healthy family system finds bossy as a natural leader and imaginative. That's how they see that person. So defiant from a toxic family. The healthy family says they hold strong beliefs. They're daring. They're resolute. Toxic, demanding. The healthy knows what they want, forthright. Toxic family, dramatic. The healthy family, expressive, enthusiastic. I swear, my aunt always said that. When my dad would say, or my mom would say, I'm dramatic, she would say, oh, she's so enthusiastic. So toxic family, fearful. The healthy family says they're careful and discerning. The toxic family calls them fussy. The healthy family says they have strong preferences. The toxic family says hyperactive. The healthy family says energetic, passionate, on the go. The toxic family says impulsive. The healthy family says spontaneous and intuitive. The toxic family says oppositional. The healthy family advocates for a different perspective. Toxic family calls them rebellious. The healthy family says they're finding their own way. The toxic family calls them stubborn. The healthy family says they're persistent, determined, and unwavering. The toxic family says they're talkative. The healthy family says they enjoy communicating. The toxic family calls them a tattletale. The healthy family says they're seeking justice. They respect rules and are fair. The toxic family says they're unfocused. The healthy family says they multitask. They pay attention to many things. And the toxic family says attention seeking. And the healthy family says they advocate for their needs and they seek connection. So how many of those toxic family negative labeling did I receive as an ADHD child?
Probably all of them. I've heard you called most of those things in
our adulthood.
Yeah.
And that
14 years.
She writes, negative labeling makes perfectly whole people believe they are broken. And this is tragic. And when we talk about these words, and we talk to our kids about that, your words matter and the things you say to people are important, and to pause and use your words. And I think to have these negative labels, and when we talked about smear campaigns, these things they're hitting people before you even enter. So these labels are already given to you before you even walk into the room with other people. And so they're tainting, if they're on the healthy side and would express those things in a more realistic, positive light, they're a little tainted by hearing this negative label. And I think a lot of times when people hear something negative and it's coming from a family member, you're like, oh, something must really be wrong if their own family is saying these horrible things about them. Instead of going, why are they talking about their child like that? Like, it, and I mean, we've said it in joking ways in the past, and I even feel guilty about it, but we said, oh my God, kids are assholes sometimes. But that's just because they just do stuff, and, age appropriate stuff that's like, oh my God, if this was an adult around me, I would not be around them. But obviously they're your kids, you love them, and it's age appropriate. And I feel awful about ever saying something like that, but not because those behaviors aren't displayed, but because they would never deserve that. It's just an idea of like, oh my God, if that was an adult around me, that they would be a toxic person to live with, right? And we would say it in a joking way, but I still don't, we don't do that anymore. I think it was just a way of being like, we're tired parents. But we said it to each other, and I think there's also like a way in which you're joking around and you're also sharing all of these things that you love about the kid. You're not literally just...
You're never saying these things to them or about them, to other people in a way that you're trying... This is all a narrative, right? Yeah, it's all about control.
Right.
You're demanding. You're a tattletale. You're stubborn. That's a way for a toxic family member to control you and control the narrative.
Yes.
It's
and to make it your fault.
Right. Whereas in the healthy family, all of those labels that you listed are all about empowerment, about wanting you to grow and be empowered to speak up for yourself and have your own thoughts and go out on your own and thrive, not control you and make everyone around you know that you are less than the person telling you those things.
Well, and what's crazy is when I look at the list that she shares and I'm reading them, all of the things from a healthy family system were my internal thoughts and how I knew I was being misunderstood. Like, especially the attention seeking. Oh, Angie just wants attention. She's got to be the center of attention. No, I was advocating for my own age appropriate needs. And I wanted a connection with my family. And the whole reason that this whole family issue came to light 4 years ago was me seeking connection. And instead I'm being labeled as selfish, attention seeking, wanting someone else to be unhappy, when all I wanted was a connection with my sister and to not lose a connection when we lived far apart. I wasn't asking for anything else. And I was advocating for the fact that none of this was adding up. And I was speaking out about what I was experiencing and what I was seeing as harmful. And when I look at these lists and I compare them, there is a grief in going, oh my gosh, if they would have actually looked at my ADHD behaviors and my natural tendencies in a positive light, in a healthy light, how different my life experience would have been. And there's grief in that, and knowing that I never got that and I never will from them. But the part of it is that I'm with you and giving that healthy label in our family with our kids so that they get to experience the inner knowing of these healthy labels that I always had. They get to experience them within themselves as well as with our support.
And I say this all the time, you're inherently good, and it's hard to imagine that you could be an even better person. Because I think you're a great person.
Well, gosh, I'm terrible at thank you. I just need to say,
oh, you're welcome.
I just need to say thank you. So here's the thing. If you've grown up in this dysfunction and it's hard to see the signs, we understand. That's why we're sharing. It feels normal. They don't feel like red flags. Becoming aware and understanding the reality of the situation is this is the key to understanding and healing from what you've gone through, healing from this abuse. So we always talk about awareness and understanding. It's what you need to understand. You need to educate yourself on these things, especially when they're affecting your quality of life. You only have so long on this earth. You deserve to give yourself the best chance at a wonderful life. So we want to help you grow your awareness today. And after hearing these signs and characteristics and traits of unhealthy, toxic, narcissistic family traits, I want you to try this 3-part exercise that I've done and I do with clients. It's a self-reflection. So the first thing I want you to do is write down from the list that I read, write down the ones that apply to you and your family of origin. And doing this just helps you to see the truth clearly. Sometimes if you just hear something, like I said, when you come from a toxic family, you can put a positive spin on these healthy things or enable them by making excuses and blaming yourself and all of that. Just literally from what the lists that I shared, which ones applied to you and your family of origin. Just write them out so that you can see them. The second part is, once you have them all written down, describe how that person made you feel as they exhibited those traits. So this allows you to acknowledge your feelings once you've brought your awareness to light, especially if you've been suppressing them or ignoring them. Like I've talked about it before, where my journaling practice would literally be like I'm writing a newspaper full of facts, and I knew the time that, I had all the evidence, right? But I never talked about how I felt, and I had trouble finding my feelings, which meant I was actually suppressing them and not allowing myself to feel them. But that's part of the healing and growing your awareness, because that impacts your day to day. And then the third step is for you to write down, what would you like to be different? Or what are you already doing differently with the family you've created? So write down which ones apply to you, express how they make you feel, and what do you want to do differently, or what are you doing differently? Try that on. Let me know what your experience is. I'd love to hear your feedback on kind of getting these things out. It really, really brings them to light. So grow your awareness today. Try that exercise. Until next time.